Okay. Welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Every Friday night at 5 p.m., we're on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, and simulcast on cjmarsradio.com and 365 Live. And then we're rebroadcast throughout the week on awakeradio.us, hazyradio.com, and firehorseradio.com. And you can also find our old shows are up on YouTube, the Opperman Report YouTube channel, so you can want to go there and subscribe to that. And we're also on Spreaker.com, and very, very soon we're going to be on iHeartRadio as well. And I'm working on TuneIn.com to broadcast our stuff as well. Oh, by the way, real quick, I know a lot of people are fascinated with the show that I did on Caravans at Midnight with John B. Wells. About the Millers and about David Vanderbeek and Gordon Martinez, the sheriff and the governor candidate and the sheriff candidate here in Vegas, and their connections to the Millers, the guys who shot those cops at the Walmart here in Las Vegas. Now, we did the show. There was a whole bunch of interference with that show, trying to get that show up. We were taping that show on Caravans at Midnight with John B. Wells 2 days in a row. We put in about 2 8-hour days trying to get that show together. And then you might remember, too, that I did a show with these gentlemen, with the candidate for governor and the candidate for sheriff, their campaign manager, and also a candidate for assemblyman here in Las Vegas, all who had personal contact with these Millers. And my show got totally deleted off my hard drive. And then when we downloaded the recording the next day to a Google Drive, it got deleted from there as well. So we've had a lot of really bizarre interference with that show. But it's finally up now. The one I did with John B. Wells is up on Caravans at Midnight. You can go to my Facebook page. There's a link there where you can download it for 99 cents. Okay, let's see. Now, tonight we have with us David Livingston. And he's written a couple of books. And he has a website called Terrorism and the Illuminati. And you can find that at www.terrorism-illuminati.com. And he's got a couple of books, Black Terror, White Soldier, and Terrorism and the Illuminati. And you can find both of these books on Amazon.com. But if you go to my blog, The Opperman Report, you can find a link to both of those books. I think he has another book, too, but I couldn't find a link, so I'll get it before the show's over, and we'll get that up. But, David, are you there with us?
I'm here. Hi.
David, thank you so much for coming on the show. I know it's 4th of July, and I know this is a big holiday up there in Canada, but you took time out to come on the show with me today, so thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you. And, David, can you tell us a little about your background and your education and how you came to write these books?
Simply put, I went to University in Montreal, Concordia University, but I went to a specialized program called Liberal Arts College.
Okay.
And what it was designed to do was designed to sort of resurrect the kind of old school liberal arts education. And it was a really smart program, except that it was all about propaganda. And I didn't know that at the time, but what attracted me to it is that it was 3 courses per year that were coordinated simultaneously, and over the period of 3 years, you would progress through history. So, like the first year would go from the Bible to the French Revolution, from the second year from French Revolution, 20th century, and the third year was 20th century. So, what attracted me to it is that I really wanted to get a solid idea of everything that was considered, essential to understanding Western history. So it's kind of like the old, what they call the Great Books program. And so anything that was, considered a major work, major era, epic, and so on and so forth, we covered. So I really felt that I got a very solid introduction to what are considered, the fundamental ideas and texts of what's considered Western civilization. So what happened is that eventually, only recently, in fact, I found out that the school basically is covered in Illuminati symbolism, and even it uses the logo, the Owl of Minerva, which is the Owl of Minerva was the original symbol of the Illuminati used on one of their original texts. So they continue to use the actual symbol of the Illuminati as the logo for the school. And it turns out that the whole idea of that kind of program goes back to Leo Strauss, and before him, the University of Chicago, which is a Rockefeller-funded institution, and the Rockefeller Foundation, which basically created the whole idea of the Western civilization course. So why that was handy is that as I started studying it, especially the Western civilization book, or textbook that was required reading, was really, the classic example of what I call now the myth of Western civilization, because it's propaganda. And what George Orwell said, I can't remember if I can remember correctly, he said, he who controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the present controls the past. And history is, our conception of history is essential for propaganda, to put propaganda, modern propaganda in context. So the idea that people have become accustomed to of their understanding of history as beginning in Greece, progressing through Rome, the Renaissance, blah, 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 is really a manufactured version, a highly altered version of history, which was designed to serve very specific purposes. So I already discovered when I was reading this textbook that there were some very strange anomalies, some very strange ideas, what I thought, especially to what's referred to as the emergence of the Indo-Europeans, which is actually a politically correct term for the Aryan race. So already at this, I was only 23 at the time. My knowledge of history was very limited, but something about it piqued my interest, and I started studying. And the more I dug, the more I started to find out that the idea of an Aryan race and so on and so forth was linked to occult ideas. So then I became curious about the occult and how could the occult contribute to that extent to a mainstream understanding of history. When I started studying the occult, I started to realize there was all kinds of wild and fantastic theories that were associated with this history. Then I became curious to know what was the truth, to differentiate between what is claimed by occultists and what is in fact the truth. So that's when I set out basically to prove or to, as accurately as possible, identify the development of occult history, to differentiate it from the claims, because that's essential, because the claims is what they are getting away with today. This is what the New Age movement is and everything. New Age movement is basically just the same old occult tradition, except that it's founded on the mythology that they've been preaching all along. So in order to disprove it, I had to get to the details of the history to find what actually happened to disprove what they are claiming. So, make a long story short, that's what happened. I set out to, like I said, identify the true history of the occult, and that's how I ended up writing my first book, which is called The Dying God, The Hidden History of Western Civilization. And that's when I isolated the origin of the occult tradition, because the occult tradition, they like to, beat themselves to all kinds of, far back in ancient times, particularly Atlantis, and so before the flood, and so on and so forth. These are all fabrications. The reality is that the occult begins in the 6th century BC, specifically Babylon, with the advent of the Babylonian Magi, and then Greece. So Pythagoras, Plato were the first important exponents of the occult, and have always been regarded as such. And then to Rome, and actually then through the world of Islam, and then finally the Renaissance, and so on, and then the Enlightenment. So that's what my first book is, and then that led me, and then once I started to research those areas further, that's what got me into my second and third book, which is Terrorism and the Illuminati, which covers the British plot to create Islamic fundamentalism. And then my most recent book, which is Black Terror, White Soldiers, which kind of reincorporates a lot of everything that I've studied over the years, but just adds a whole lot more details, and I think makes a much more powerful case of what's really going on.
So in your studies, what you've discovered is that this whole supposed jihadist movement is actually a creation of British intelligence originally, and then today's CIA.
Absolutely.
That's what I've always thought too, you know, and I've gotten into so many arguments with people about this as well. Why don't you give us, let's start out with the history of the Muslim Brotherhood and how they were created, and because people right now, they're so concerned that, you know, they were elected in Egypt, but I always call them Muslim Brotherhood CIA, and they're funded by CIA, and they're controlled by CIA. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, the problem is that people fall for the absurdity that the Muslims could somehow pose a threat. You know?
Yeah, right.
It's really tragic, right? It really speaks negatively to the general mentality out there that people are susceptible to that kind of nonsense. But, you know, they're constantly creating an us versus them mentality, and that's really what the media is for, right? Everything is always the good guys against the bad guys, so that it's easy to then kind of transpose that kind of thinking onto the political reality and make things very black and white. So, you know, it's so completely absurd, but I think people sort of feel a desire to rally behind a cause, and generally it tends to be the cause of quote-unquote American democracy. So, to get back to the point, basically, you know, this type of jihad that the Muslim Brotherhood are doing, all these organizations, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, there's no way that kind of stuff can be justified in Islamic law. Islamic law is actually one of the most sophisticated intellectual projects in history. And this is another part of the purpose of the history of Western civilization. This is why it specifically omits the history of the Middle East and specifically highlights the history of Greece, then Rome, and then Europe, to suggest that any important developments only took place in those parts of the world. The reality is that ancient Greece was just a small, very tiny, insignificant collection of city-states. The empire at the time was, the great empire at the time was Persia, which is extensive, massive, sophisticated. But, you know, for the reasons only the Rockefellers know, they chose to omit that very basic component of history. But what it does, in the end, is it makes Westerners grossly ignorant of the history of the West of the world. Because what they're trying to convince people is that Western civilization is the only true manifestation of human intellectual achievement. So anything that's of any significance has only taken place here, and nothing really else has gone on anywhere else. So this is how they're able to suggest things like they do today, that somehow the Taliban are, you know, a representative of Islam, which is ridiculous.
You know, one thing that always strikes me about the Taliban is I remember, you know, way before 9/11, when I first heard about the Taliban, the person I heard about them from, their lobbyist in Washington, was the daughter of the director of the CIA.
Right.
Now, which CIA director was that?
I'm sorry, I can't remember.
I can't remember either. It drives me crazy because you can't find anything about that on the internet now.
No. Well, there you go.
Yeah, I know.
There's the CIA's Frankenstein monster. That's what the image that they have portrayed is exactly what they wanted them to portray. This is what they needed. The problem is that, you know, the sad fact is that you know, the Islamic history had its glory days, but they're gone, and they ended pretty much in 1924. They were deteriorating over centuries, but really, the Islamic Empire officially collapsed with the end of the Ottoman Empire in 1924. And so, what you have now in the Islamic world is actually pretty much what you have here in the West, which is, you know, no one's going to consider America, I'm sorry, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but a Christian nation, and, you know, effectively, right? It's composed, you know, to a large degree by people who normally follow Christianity, but it's not really a Christian nation. If you look at the churches, they're largely empty, mostly populated by the the elderly. I hope I'm not making any offensive generalizations, but it's like that up here. So in the Islamic world, it's pretty much the same thing. You go something like 20% of the population attends mosque, and they happen to be mostly seniors. The kids are listening, they're watching MTV, they're listening to, American pop music and, playing video games. They've been heavily influenced by American culture. So that's the reality of the Islamic world. So it's pretty much impossible for them to organize any kind of threat towards the West because there's no Islamic authority. Like I said, there's countries where there's Muslims in them, but those are not Muslim countries. So this is why it's been necessary to fabricate that threat because it's necessary. It's part of the plan. The plan is to ultimately create this World War III. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to take place. There's various predictions that suggest it's going to be between Israel and the Middle East or the Muslims and so on and so forth. But basically, this has all been articulated by neoconservatives as a clash of civilizations. That Western history has been evolving in this particular progress for 3,000 years to develop secular democracy, which is basically the pinnacle of human intellectual evolution. But the problem is that there's still these holdouts out there who are holding on to a medieval idea, quote-unquote medieval idea of theocracy. And so the Islamic world is supposed to represent that. But like I said, it's impossible for them to articulate a threat, so it's been fabricated, and that's the purpose of the Muslim Brotherhood. So the Muslim Brotherhood is basically just fabricated to create this, phantom image of an Islamic threat. But they in no way represent Islamic law, beliefs, or values, or even sentiments.
Are you familiar with General Wesley Clark? And his he made a speech. He did a speech about the
invasion of Iraq.
Yeah, right, and about how our goal is to destabilize the Mideast and to cause chaos over there.
Yeah, exactly. So this is, and it also has, because that's part of what's called a clean break strategy that was devised by Netanyahu and Richard Perle, and that was written, I think, back in 1996. So a lot of things that have been happening only recently have actually been planned as far back as back then. And even the whole idea of the clash of civilization goes back to when would have been in the early 90s, I think, or by Samuel Huntington and Francis Fukuyama. Basically it's a new Cold War, right? When the Soviet Union, when they finally defeated the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, they needed a new Cold War threat. So Islam was the next vector on the list.
Let me ask you this, because you first started noticing this, I guess you might call it jihadist extremism in the Mideast around the 70s, okay?
Right.
You had the Iranian embassy takeover, the hostage thing, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that was part of this Illuminati plan, or was that spontaneous? Okay, go ahead.
We have to understand where terrorism comes from in the first place. But the idea of killing civilians is abhorrent in Islam. There's absolutely no way it could be condoned. So where the idea of killing civilians comes from is from Mikhail Bakunin. And he's one of the early proponents of anarchism. He was also initially a member of Marxist International before they split. So Bakunin, he basically developed this idea of what you call the propaganda of the deed, which means actions that make a political statement. So, you bomb a headquarters, you assassinate somebody, not because it brings you any strategic advantage, but because it makes a statement.
Okay.
And that's essentially the origin of terrorism, and of course it's disgusting, right? But if you read Bakunin's writings, he was an avowed Luciferian, and he basically he's one of many who articulated the whole idea of creative destruction. right? So for him, the whole Luciferian spirit is that destruction, violence, pain, misery is like a fertile ground for to bring about a new creation. So he believes in the idea of creative destruction. So that's really where it comes from. So when you look at the history of terrorism, it really starts with Bakunin, then it goes to the IRA, and who basically carried out the same thing, and then the group the next group on the list to really bring forward this idea of terrorism and the use of violence against terrorism was the Irgun, right, which was an Israeli terrorist group.
Okay.
And they were knowingly inspired by the IRA. So it was only after the violent practices of the Irgun that a number of Palestinian organizations started to adopt the same thing. But we also have to remember that the Palestinian organizations really came after the real heyday of terrorism, which was the 70s, particularly groups like the Red Brigade, Baader Meinhof gang, and so on and so forth. So these are all groups really who kind of maintain Bakunin's idea of the propaganda of the deed. And if you look at most of these organizations, they all had massive intelligence links. So, particularly this, you mentioned earlier, we talked about Dave McGowan, so this brings us back to the whole culture of the 60s, which was really a crucible for so many of these sentiments. So, a lot of that left-wing militancy grew out of what's called the New Left, whose guru, according to historians, is Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School. So, the counterculture of the 60s was really two-pronged. There was the MK-Ultra project of the CIA, but that was, and sort of, the sexual liberation and so on and so forth, but that was coupled with New Left politics. So you had kind of two branches, you had like this hippy-dippy sort of, lovey-dovey hippie trend, but then it was combined with a lot of, anti-war sentiments, anti-Vietnam resistance, so on and so forth. But that really was an emergence of the that was created by the New Left, and that was articulated as well through support of various third world independence movements, and of course included in there was the plight of the Palestinians. So that's why you find that you have groups like the PFLP, if I'm saying that correctly, the PLO, who had links with Baader Meinhof gang and so on and so forth. Most importantly, actually, what was going on in the 70s, which what I think is what was practiced, is the CIA and NATO were behind what's called Operation Gladio, and this was a project focused in Italy during the 70s to produce what they called a strategy of tension. And the idea was basically to keep the people in a state of panic and to carry out false flag terror operations to be blamed on the communists to undermine the popularity of the Communist Party. But these were acts that were secretly carried out by fascist organizations. And that's where it comes in, the third word of, the second word of my subtitle, which is of my latest book, Black Terror, White Soldiers, because that's what I cover. I cover the extent of the use and collaboration of the CIA with international fascist organizations. And that's what the origin of modern terrorism is. And that's what because the Muslim Brotherhood is merely an extension of the CIA's international use of fascist organizations across the world, all the Gladio networks across the world. There were Gladio networks pretty much in every country in Europe, in Turkey, most importantly in South America as well, and in Egypt, it was the Muslim Brotherhood, which is basically a fascist organization.
Wait, but in your books, you studied also too the Baader Meinhof gang and the Red Army faction?
Yes. Okay,
now because it's my understanding that they described in the beginning they did those things where remember when they did that bank robbery and they did like 10 bank robberies in one day, and they had popular support, But then later on, they claimed, hey, there's a lot of actions being taken here that are being taken under our name that we're not responsible for. And that's what you're talking about?
I think maybe that's like the Red Brigade you're talking about, probably. And that's the bottom line. Well, I'm not sure.
Right, I believe Red Army faction and Baader-Meinhof were the same, no?
Yeah, but the Red Brigade was the other one in Italy.
Right, yeah, I wasn't talking about Red Brigade, yeah.
So, yeah, that's this history is kind of a little murky, right?
Yeah.
But what was her name? One of the Baader's girlfriend. She was actually the great-granddaughter of Hegel.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Hegel is the ultimate oracle of the Illuminati. The last, when we talk about the Western civilization course, it's all based on Hegel's philosophy of history. The entire notion of progress, of the evolution of Western history from Greece, Rome to Europe, so on and so forth. The entire basis of the clash of civilization is from Hegel. And she happens to be his great-granddaughter or great-great-granddaughter or something like that.
So then you believe that it's possible that the origin of Baader-Meinhof was some kind of psyop to begin with?
Oh, yeah, I think that's pretty certain.
Okay, well then let me ask you this then, because then how do you think that we should go about resisting this oppression that we're under?
Yeah, so, this is the trick, right?
Yeah.
And this is the part that people miss. That the Illuminati strategy tends to be using subversion, right, like Animal Farm. So you point which by the way I've read about recently. This was the animated version of Animal Farm was financed by the CIA.
Oh, brother.
So the idea is that you point out all the errors of the farmer, and you rally the people to overthrow him in order to give power to the pigs. Right?
Gotcha.
This is supposed to be a way of disparaging the communist world, but this is the MO, and always has been. When you go back to the Enlightenment, which was basically the first Illuminati project, the first important major occult project, the way that they gained power was by pointing to the corruption of the aristocracy, the supposed corruption of the church, and calling for their elimination and replacement by a secular order, which was them. So they did the same. They did that in France. They did it in the United States. They did it in Russia, and they do it all the time. So people are looking for the Illuminati in the wrong direction. They need to turn around 180 degrees, look the other way, because where you're going to find the Illuminati is, sure, they're in the right-wing think tanks, but they're also marching in the streets.
Like Occupy Wall Street,
right?
Occupy Wall Street.
They're carrying placards, exactly, all that stuff, right? So really, where you got to look for the Illuminati is the problem is that really they command both camps, and this is where Hegel comes in, right? Because this is the Kabbalistic view of the world. This basically that you create a synthesis out of struggling dualities, right? So that's how history resolves itself, is by these struggling dualities, so good and evil, or black and white, and so left and right, and
north and south,
communism, fascism, right?
Yeah.
So this is why they always command both sides. So you look at Canada, it's the same thing. You got the United States, a Republican, Democrat, right? They just kind of revolving door back and forth. A couple of years is one party, a couple of years the next one, forever.
Yeah, and it's the same policy, and it's 41%, 49% to 51%. The policy is almost so identical, and yet the people are rapidly fighting each other over Obama or Romney. Right.
So this is their Hegelian understanding that this is how they create change. This is how, the cliche is called the Hegelian dialectic. So you have a thesis and an antithesis, which creates, which eventually through conflict creates a synthesis. So that's basically, that's why you find that that's where they are. The Illuminati are in all these left-wing organizations. Like this is one of my major complaints these days, and this is how they've really manipulated the United States most recently, especially with conspiracy culture. They have manipulated conspiracy culture to sell neoliberalism.
Right. Now, I was going to ask you about that, but let's get into that. I'm going to take a little break and read some live commercials. But when we get back, I want to talk about, because what I'm doing right now. Okay, right now I'm on this radio station. I'm trying to bring about awareness and kind of, rise people up. But maybe I'm being manipulated. What do you think?
We can talk about that.
Okay, my friend. No, but this is fascinating stuff. My guest tonight is David Livingston. He's got a couple of books. Let me pull him up real fast. His website is terrorism-illuminati.com. He's the author of Black Terror, White Soldiers, and Terrorism and the Illuminati. Fascinating stuff. You can find links to his books on my blog, The Opperman Report. This is a brilliant guy that spent a life of study here that I believe deserves attention. Okay, now a word from our sponsors. Okay, everybody knows Pacific West Bamboo, 503-839-8126. That's Amanda over at Pacific West Bamboo. And Pacific West Bamboo has some stuff coming up because they're going to be at the Portland Bamboo Festival, July 14th from 10 a.m. To 3 p.m. at the Stevens Pavilion on Hoyt Arboretum, I don't know how to pronounce that, Arboretum, featuring lectures, workshops, vendors, and demonstrations. They're also excited to announce that they will be assisting the building of the stage and art pieces for Pickathon 2014 in Happy Valley, Oregon. And everybody knows Pacific West Bamboo. They're your number one source for timber construction and craft-grade bamboo poles, plants, and products. Check out their website, their Facebook page. Pacific West Bamboo, 503-839-8126. Our other sponsor is Infinity Home Plans. This is Mike Gray. He was on the show last week, called in for the after show. Check out Infinity Home Plans and Design Services, your resource for 3D, 2D architectural services. They offer a multitude of products, including stock home plans, 2D digital drawing sets, 3D models, and renderings, and more. Hey, guys, don't forget my daughter, Victoria Opperman, has a show tomorrow. It's her second show. It's called Teen Truth, and it's on cjmarsradio.com at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. Join us in the CJ Mars Radio chat room for that. Oh, by the way, guys, listen, I got a GoFundMe program. It's up on my Facebook page. Basically, it's to help me fund my litigation for my daughter, Victoria. We're involved in a catastrophic custody litigation. So please, if you can find the GoFundMe link on Facebook, I think it's called Save My Family. But go there and visit it and hear our story and all that kind of stuff going on there. Okay, emailrevealer.com with the online infidelity investigation. Now, studies indicate that up to 30% of the people using online dating services are married, and they're cheating on their partner. Now, this search, the online infidelity investigation, is for people that have noticed signs of cheating and suspect their partner is cheating online with a secret social networking site or a secret personal ad on internet dating sites. So you provide us the email address of the suspected cheating spouse, and we search thousands of online personal ads, websites, and dating sites. And if that email is registered to any of those internet dating services, we provide you a report with a list of all those sites that the email is registered on. It includes dating sites, swinger sites, fetish sites, and social networks. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can call us up at 800-448-0772. And if you'd like to advertise on the Opperman Report to help promote your website or your business, email us at oppermanreport@gmail.com. Okay, that wasn't too long, and we're back with our guest, David Livingston, a fascinating guy, author of Black Terror, White Soldiers, Terrorism and the Illuminati. One more book. What was that other book, David?
The Dying God.
The Dying what?
The Dying God.
The Dying God. Now, is that book available? Can you buy that book on your website, terrorismilluminati.com?
Yes, I have links to all of them on my website.
Great.
They're all available on Amazon as well, too.
Now, when you first started talking, did you say that this course that you took at this college was a 3-year course?
Yeah, in Canada, the university, or in Quebec, the university is only 3 years.
Okay, that's fascinating. So now, because you have so much knowledge that you picked this up in 3 years. I guess you must have done a lot of, did a great deal of studying on your own, though, right?
Yeah. That was just a basic introduction to what I needed to study, and then I spent I've basically been studying ever since, which is 25 years now.
So what about teaching a course on this now?
Well, the problem is, you mean like in a university or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a PhD or anything like that. I've been studying on my own. Right.
No, it's a shame because you should have you should be a professor.
I really can't imagine any university that would allow me to say that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Okay, but maybe something online.
Look at poor Norman Finkelstein and what the houses they put in through.
Yeah. Okay, so now, before we took the break, we were talking about, what am I doing? I'm trying to do this show here on Revolution Radio. It's kind of, alternative media, and I'm trying to get this information out there, different things. And having guys like you on, and I think that by having you on, we're enlightening people. But do you think I'm being used as part of controlled opposition?
No. Because the problem is not, the control doesn't happen in the revelation of the information. The control happens in the proposed solution.
I missed that last thing you said.
The manipulation happens through the proposed solution.
Okay. Well,
because that's what they do, right? This is what I call the sugar coating of the poison pill. You always have to have a substantial ounce of truth with the lie. Otherwise, who's going to buy it? Right, so it always works by pointing out the real corruption. Like even Marx himself, when Marx had to identify the very real, faults with capitalism in order to attract people to be manipulated in a particular political direction. Right, it doesn't mean that now just because Marx said a whole lot of things that were right, that we need to jump on his bandwagon, right? Or anyone who's using it.
Okay, so now for myself though, like if I'm advocating doubling the tax on the top 1%, or if I'm advocating the nationalization of the oil industry, do you think I'm being manipulated in a certain way that is counterproductive?
Well, the thing is that I share your ideas, so I certainly don't. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
So really, this is really what this is what they're doing, right? Especially in the United States, is that they're still maintaining the fear of a communist conspiracy to this day, which is ridiculous.
I agree.
Right? It's a total anachronism. So, but that's how, and they always have. This is how, really frankly, if we're going to talk about the Nazis, this is what they did as well, right? They used the fear of a Jewish conspiracy to bring about to inflate the credibility of their order. So, and this is why the CIA then used all the Nazis after the war, and these Nazis then continued to be important agents in spreading or maintaining this fear of a Jewish conspiracy, and particularly a Jewish communist conspiracy. But when you look in the United States, the Communist Party was largely managed and controlled by the CIA.
Really?
Yes.
In what year? The 20s?
Probably as early as the 20s. Even if you look at the Russian Revolution, it was all financed on Wall Street.
Right.
Okay? Particularly starting with Jacob Schiff. But the guy who really begins with is Jay Lovestone, who actually became president of the Communist Party. So that was as early as the 30s, and then after, continued being manipulated way after. This is why so much of that new left during the 60s was just the same old story. Particularly with groups like or people like Angela Davis, who's on the CIA payroll, the Black Panther Party, right? The Weather Underground.
I'll tell you a funny story about the Weather Underground. I had Mark Rudd on my show. You familiar with Mark Rudd?
Not vaguely.
Megaphone Mark. If you ever read the Doomsday comic strip, he was Megaphone Mark, and he was the spokesperson for the Weather Underground for many years. He went underground. And so his story is that he didn't have to do any prison time because, the FBI broke so many laws using COINTELPRO and kidnapping, all this kind of stuff, that he didn't have to go to prison.
Sure.
Now, yeah, I know. Yeah. So I asked him. I says, "Hey, Mark, did you ever look around at any of these meetings and stuff like that? Did you ever think you were being guided or directed by maybe, agent provocateurs or some kind of double agents inside your organization there that might have been directing things?" And he goes, "No, man. I looked around. I didn't see anything like that."
No, yeah.
So I got to wonder, if you look around the room and you can't tell who the provocateur is, maybe it's you. You know what I mean?
That'd be the conclusion I could join.
Yeah, I got to say so myself. And he had some really strange things to say. He's a liberal now, and was a big supporter of Obama. And when I asked him why he supported Obama, he said to me, quote unquote, "because he's a really cool black guy."
It's a good reason.
I know, man. I know. Let me tell you, I had my mouth hanging open. I tell you, you got to listen to that interview. It's fascinating. And it was right.
I'll probably put that on his resume too. Yeah,
yeah, right. It was a week after. Yeah, it was a week after I had Dave McGowan on. Oh my goodness.
There you go.
Now, let me ask you.
If you look at mostly whether underground people, I think they all got pretty much scot-free. Well,
you know what? Yeah, a lot of them did. Some are still in prison. And you got to wonder. And again, tonight you talk about the Black Panther Party. I had a guy on from the Black Panther Party, a fascinating guy, Lorenzo Kumbawa Irvin, who was facing 2 life prison terms. But he got out in 15 years though, and he's still organizing and an activist to this day. But you're right. Because I was a member of the Yippies when I was a youngster in high school. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
In New York City. And I got to tell you, I know what you're talking about. There was all kinds of infiltration and skullduggery and informants and people that were drug, informants just they had their drug cases hanging over their heads. Like Timothy Leary had a drug case over his head,
Yeah.
But
and a major, he's the key agent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And he claimed that the Weather Underground busted him out, but I find that whole story hard to believe. That he shimmied down some telephone wire or something to break out of his, minimum security prison. Hey, we were talking about Dan McGowan. Did you ever look into his books, Program to Kill?
I a little bit, but I'm mostly more familiar with his other sort of, especially Laurel Canyon articles and stuff like that.
Yeah, incredible stuff. Yeah, it's called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. And if you go to my blog, too, we have a link to his book as well. Fascinating guy. And again, like you, just did all this research with all this information at the top of his head.
Yeah, it's good research. It's a significant portion of that part of my book came from him.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then other things I was able to connect.
Very good, very good. Now we're watching the news now, right, of what's going on in Iraq with this group ISIS.
Yeah.
Now, David, how is this possible? How is this possible that this group just rose up out of nowhere? They've got all these uniforms. They're an organized group.
They're all driving like Toyota trucks and
yeah. And don't they even have helicopters and U.S. Humvees and stuff?
Probably, yeah.
Now, if this is so in your face, you'd have to be a complete idiot to fall for this.
I would hope so, yeah.
So what do you think? Who's behind that?
Well, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, they're pretty new on the scene, so I haven't followed them very closely. I know the issues in general. So, I know how basically modern Islamic terror in general is co-opted and serving a particular agenda. So they basically just fit into that. And the thing is, what you find about all these groups is they all belong. They're almost without exception funded by Saudi Arabia. And they, like the Muslim Brotherhood, they follow what's called the Salafi reform movement of Islam. So this is what I was mentioning earlier, that when you look at one of the things that their actions cannot possibly be justified by Islamic law or Sharia. Now, Sharia's got a really bad name these days, but people have no idea what Sharia is because the Taliban wasn't it. So what the Salafi movement is basically the core of British strategy, or now CIA strategy in the Middle East. So it's an attempt to create a British modified version of Islam that goes all the way back to the 1700s. That was created in Saudi Arabia. So that's what you find that these groups are. So this is how they're able to do the actions that they do, because they basically reject orthodox Islamic law and tradition. And the basic premise that they operate under is that they need to adapt Islam, and so basically they just write it to whatever purpose they feel like, because all of these things are normally not acceptable. So this is how they're able to create these kinds of factions, because it's otherwise not possible. I mean, when I say they, I mean the CIA. This is how the CIA is able to create this faction. This is why they've been behind the spread of the Salafi movement since going back 250 years now.
And it was the Saudis who created all these, it's called the Wahhabi schools?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So the Wahhabi, yeah.
Yeah, so they created these schools and funded them all across the Middle East. Explain to us what that is.
Well, especially in Pakistan, that's what they did. I mean, it's important to understand the whole strategy in general. So, because it goes back to at least Brzezinski and the idea of creating an market crisis. So basically creating a sort of a swath of Islamic militancy across the Middle East to act as a bulwark against the Soviet Union. So they needed a gang of thugs that they could throw at the Russians. So that's why they used a faction of the Muslim Brotherhood in Afghanistan, which was called Hizb Islami, which was headed by Machar, who was, like a major drug dealer. And of course, that's how it operates. Like, the CIA is always generates its coverts on this through narcotics generally, like Air America and Vietnam and so on and so forth.
Sure.
So that was the beginnings of the strategy over there. And at the same time, this is how they produced Al-Qaeda. So I'm trying to get back to your question. There's many directions we could take.
Well, yeah, it seemed you mentioned how Brzezinski was one of the authors of this, and that would fit in with that fits in with the Iran hostage crisis.
Pretty much, yeah, because that's where it starts as well, right? It started with the Ayatollah Khomeini as well was an agent. The thing is that Iran was a long-standing stronghold of the British, particularly because that's where British Petroleum was getting their oil for most of the century. And you find, I'm going to recommend a great book at this point. It's called Devil's Game by Robert Dreyfus, and he details a lot of this. I think
Devil's Gate?
Devil's Game. Devil's Game.
Yeah.
GME. I think the subtitle is How the U.S. Helped Unleash Islamic Fundamentalism or something like that.
Oh, very good.
When you look at, like this image that they present of the Iranian mullahs, for the most part, these have been British agents over the century. So the Ayatollah Khomeini was no exception. And what they started there was, after they put him in power, that basically opened up the way to start the Iran-Contra operation, which is when Israel was illegally selling weapons to Iran, and then created this triangle with cocaine from Nicaragua, which was being funneled through Mena, Arkansas, under Bill Clinton's watch, and then being sold throughout the United States to Saddam, the crack epidemic.
Right.
And so, at this time, what happens is that you have two key people who were basically the leading figures in this network, and they were based in Texas, working mainly with, I think his name is James Batt, who was working with the Bush family. So those two characters are Salim bin Laden, which is bin Laden's brother, and Ali bin Mahfouz. So these two guys are basically set up shop in Houston, and were collaborating basically in business partnerships, quote-unquote oil businesses, because these are usually CIA friends. Because that's how Daddy Bush got his start. He started with the pile oil, which is basically guys, like I said, one of them was bin Laden's older brother. He finally died. But Bin Mahfouz is, one of the most powerful, most connected guys in Saudi Arabia. And he becomes one of the key financiers of Al-Qaeda in various places like from Afghanistan and other little hotspots. So the arrangement was basically, in fact, this arrangement goes all the way back to the early 70s. It's called the Safari Club, where after Watergate, the CIA's hands were kind of tied, and everything had to be basically approved by Congress. So they made an arrangement with Saudi Arabia that because the Saudis, in fact, the U.S. had just now I'm going all over the place.
No, I'm following you. I'm watching.
So many things is good. So this, a really key event here is the orchestration of the oil crisis.
Right.
By Henry Kissinger.
Right. In order for Iran to buy weapons from the United States.
It basically created phenomenal wealth for Saudi Arabia. The price of oil, I think, quadrupled in I don't know how many months or a couple of years. And then the arrangement was that the Saudis would basically deposit their windfall in Chase Bank in New York, which is a Rockefeller bank.
Right.
I mean, the Rockefellers basically owned Saudi Arabia and always have. They basically created the country in the first place.
And real quick, let me interrupt you because I'll never forget watching a press conference with Jimmy Carter when they asked him, why did you allow the Shah of Iran into the United States? And he said, well, David Rockefeller told me. He was about to say David Rockefeller told me to. He stuttered and he caught himself. It was a live press conference. I'll never forget.
Yeah, exactly. So basically after that, the Saudis had, piles of cash.
Right.
And so the arrangement from that time was that the Saudis were going to finance CIA operations covertly on America's behalf to keep it out of Congress, out of the eyes of Congress, and that's why it started with the funding. This is where they created the myth, where Saudi Arabia created the myth that they were fighting communism, right? And this is pretty much what the Muslim Brotherhood served for, that they were fighting communism because the communists were supposedly atheists.
Right.
This is the pretext that they used. So everywhere so not only were they fighting the atheists in the Middle East, but they were also going to fight them in South America. So that's how the Saudis started to get involved in the Iran-Contra operation, which was basically largely to generate funds then to finance the quote-unquote jihad in Afghanistan, which was a Muslim Brotherhood operation. And that's where bin Laden basically started to receive his. The amazing thing is that bin Laden himself said that, in his own words, the money came from the Saudis, the training came from the Americans.
Right, and now we have in Afghanistan, like the poppy production is like 10 times what it used to be.
Absolutely,
yeah. And it's interesting, too, how they demonized the Muslims, and then suddenly there was these radical Muslims who control all the oil, so now the price of oil skyrockets through the roof,
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, too, whenever the value of oil goes up in the Middle East, every time a bomb goes off in the Middle East and the price of oil goes up, the value of oil pumped in Oklahoma goes up, too.
Yeah.
So, hey, if I owned an oil well in Oklahoma or Texas, I would want bombs going off in the Middle East every day.
That's pretty much what's going on, yeah.
It seems to
that's
be.
Part of it. I mean, it's all Exxon Mobil, right?
Yeah.
And so the oil is a means, though. It's a means to political ends. It's not, they make profits, but it's because they need the money for their other strategies.
Right.
I think people often confuse the oil as being the purpose, or oil profits as being the purpose, but it's not. It's just a means.
Gotcha. Okay. One thing, in your studies here, you must have run across the name Adnan Khashoggi.
Absolutely.
Okay. There's so many people I bring up the name Adnan Khashoggi, and people who should be knowing what they're talking about. But what can you tell us about Adnan Khashoggi? He seems to have had his hands in everything.
Yeah, I wouldn't. He's just one of so many characters that I wouldn't be able to give you enough specifics because he just involved in everything. That guy, he's a fan. You know what he's connected with? He's even connected with, Maurice Strong.
Okay, well, we'll get to that when we get back. But we're with David Livingston. Fascinating guy, man. You know, this guy's an encyclopedia. Even more, this is a college level professor course that you can catch from this guy. His books are Black Terror, White Soldiers, Terrorism, and the Illuminati. His website is terrorism-illuminati.com. His name is David Livingstone with an E at the end. So you go on Amazon, you can look up all his books. I got a link to a couple of his books on the Opperman Report blog. We'll be right back after this. We got a nice long break, David, so you got a cup of coffee, whatever you want to do. But mute up, okay? Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Every Friday night, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we're on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, and we're simulcast on cjmarsradio.com and 365 Live. Although tonight there seems to be a problem with CJ Mars Radio, and they didn't pick us up. So, unfortunately, tonight we're only on freedomslips.com, but we're rebroadcast during the week on awakeradio.us and Hazy Radio and firehorseradio.com, and you can always find us on the Opperman Report YouTube channel and our Spreaker channel, which is also the Opperman Report. Want to remind everybody that freedomslips.com is a listener-sponsored station. We have no corporate sponsors. So if you want to support our station, you have to go visit freedomslips.com and find the donate button and click on the donate button. Now also, too, real quick, I almost forgot about this, but there is a auction on ourfreedomnetwork.com, ourfreedomnetwork.com, okay? And that's there's an auction to support the station. They have all kinds of goodies for sale on there. You can pick up pretty fancy stuff too, tools, and like a saxophone is on there and stuff. They got all kinds of handmade goods and all kind of products. So head over there and support the station. Either go to freedomslips.com and you click on the donate button, or you go to the auction. Maybe you can buy something decent that you want. So now tonight we got with us fascinating guy, David Livingston. His website is terrorism-illuminati.com. He's the author of Black Terror, White Soldiers, Terrorism, and the Illuminati. I tell you, I've been listening to his interviews all day long, and before tonight, I told him, hey, can you take it easy on me? Because the guy has so much historical information. The guy, he's so way over my head, so I really appreciate David, treating me like one of one of the basic students in your class here, okay? But let's get into Adnan Khashoggi, okay? Just to give people a little overview, because the guy's involved in everything. I think I don't have too much. The thing is, I've written about him in my books, but those are a lot of the facts that I haven't really memorized, so I wouldn't be able to run off too much. Well, basically, as far as I can see, he's not really one of the leading characters. He's just very much active in those networks. Basically, he's a wealthy Saudi with a lot of all kinds of dubious connections. To get it.
All kinds of stuff, from all kinds of stuff, including terrorism. So. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and even on his yacht, at one point he owned the largest yacht in the world, and he used to throw parties on that yacht with Michael Jackson, Elizabeth Taylor, Donald Trump, Ann Coulter, Geraldo Rivera, and then on the other hand, he's hobnobbing with people like Bin Laden, and he even testified before Congress, I believe it was, that he was donating 10% of all of his income to the Bin Laden and the Al Qaeda faction.
Yeah. So, that's how it works, right? That's where Bin Laden's connections were pretty. They're pretty good. They're pretty strong, and it's ridiculous how. It's ridiculous that they could turn a guy like that and make him out to be the villain that they did.
Well, you want to hear something really interesting that I just found out today? It's going to blow your mind if you haven't heard it. But you know the Carlyle Group, right?
Yeah.
Did you know that they just bought the Kennedy Museum?
Okay.
So they bought the John F. Kennedy Museum. So here you have guys like George Bush now control all the historical record over the Kennedy assassination.
Perfect.
Isn't that amazing?
His dad, who suspected, George Bush. You know how it's like a cultural, an American. Everybody remembers exactly where they were on the assassination of JFK, right?
Right.
Like it's something that to say is the moment was so profound and so clear that it just made an imprint on everybody's memory. Well, George Bush just happened to be one of the few who can't remember where he was on that day.
He was probably busy. He was probably at church that day. He was probably volunteering at the Boy Scouts or something. Along this theme, okay, let me ask you this. Now, what do you think is behind this whole psyop that Barack Obama is a Muslim?
Oh, yeah, right. Well, this gets us back to the whole manufacture of the right wing in the United States. And it really starts, if we're going to get to the bottom of it, it starts with the neoconservatives.
Okay.
And the neoconservatives, this takes us back to Leo Strauss, which I mentioned earlier, because Leo Strauss is the exponent of what's called the Great Books Program. Leo Strauss, he got his start in the United States at the University of Chicago, right, which is Rockefeller University. And he was connected with the Frankfurt School as well. The Frankfurt School are pretty much the architects of 20th century American culture, beginning with the 60s counterculture. So Leo Strauss is basically the guru of the neoconservatives. And Leo Strauss, in fact, this is the fascism portion of my book. This is where he's part of a tradition known as synarchism. We don't need to go into that. It's very involved, but just to mention it. It's basically a fascist occult tradition. So Leo Strauss, he revived an interpretation of Plato. And Plato, we have to remember, and this is why Western history, the version of Western history that is taught in the West, focuses on the Greeks out of all the ancient nations as being the cradle of Western civilization. And of course, Plato is sort of recognized as the leading exponent of it. But the fact is in reality, because the curious thing is that Plato was presented as being very much one of the first exponents of rational tradition, right, the beginning of reason. So he's supposed to be a guy who basically eschews any kind of superstition and tries to come up with only a completely rational interpretation of reality. But in reality, Plato was one of the first and most important exponents of the Kabbalah, which begins in Babylon in 6th century BC. This is too much for me to prove, but this is what I prove in my book, The Dying God.
Okay.
So that's really where my research started. Because throughout history, Plato has always been regarded as great godfather of the Kabbalah. The great Hebrew Kabbalists of the centuries, beginning from the 3rd century BC, right up until the Renaissance, all regarded Plato as the great, one of the great teachers of Kabbalah. So this is what's important. This is what's important to understand. And this is why I think that his republic is very much a blueprint for the New World Order plan. And it's also a fascist blueprint. Most of the basics of fascism are found in Plato's republic. So what Leo Strauss isolates is the idea of using noble lies. So in the MO reality has always been the same. It's always the idea that there is no truth. This is what they think. There's no truth, so you can do whatever you want. And because there's no truth, it's survival of the fittest out there. And so you got to do unto others before they do unto you.
Yeah.
And so what they think, though, is that And this is where Nietzsche comes in. This is where Nietzsche comes in. This is where the whole idea of God is dead comes in, and nihilism, and how it's the origin of fascism, because they think that the average person is not able to face the very dark and harsh reality that there is no truth. Right? It's too bleak. They can't take it. They can't face it. So they need to make up myths. So they make up myths about an afterlife, about a God in the sky, and so on and so forth, to basically comfort themselves to not have to face the truth, that there is no truth. So this is why they believe that there are the elite who are able to face the truth, the very dark truth, that the world is dog eat dog, and then you have the masses who are too weak to face that truth, and they need myths. So this is where Leo Strauss came up with the idea of noble lies. So when you're going to lead the masses, you need some kind of myth in order to to shepherd them in the direction that you want them, because unfortunately they're just too stupid to be led in on the real basis of the government's policies. So this is the idea that the neoconservatives adopted when they started to seize control of the U.S. administration beginning in the early 70s, particularly with the Reagan administration, but they really came into force in the 80s. But the problem is, up until that point, they were just a group of radical, basically nerdy, fringe ideologues, philosophers. There's no way that these guys could go down to the corridor and recruit, Joe Plumber, as they call him, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
No one was going to clue into what these guys were talking about. So that's why the way they saw it is that they followed Leo Strauss' strategy, and that strategy was to recruit the Christian right, or to basically fabricate the Christian right. Until the 70s, the American Christian community was pretty much apolitical. And most congregations actually used to recommend against voting and things like that. So basically, they pretty much stayed out of politics.
Or with black churches who voted for Democrats.
Right. So what they did is they basically aligned themselves with a number of quote-unquote Christian leaders, mainly through particularly the Heritage Foundation, and then a number of its associated foundations, and the Moral Majority, and yeah. So, and who's like Hagee, people like that. So the dual purpose was to recruit the Christian community by speaking the Christian values or family values. But really, what they did is that they snuck in sort of an anti-communist sentiment to carry forward their neoliberal or fascist economics. So how they did that was family values and neoliberalism. Maybe you have a question at this point. I'm losing track.
No, you're losing track. Okay. Well, one thing I'd like to point out too, there was a lot of that was done through direct mail for the first time. The right started using direct mail, and it was Bush's brain. Who's that guy? You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, but one of the big Republican operatives, campaign operatives, I forget his name. Yeah.
So basically, it was all these, principally like the Heritage Foundation and a number of other foundations that were all, of course, Rockefeller funded, because
right.
Everything happens. Most of the manipulation in the United States happens through CIA, but the conduit that the CIA operates through usually is the Rockefeller Foundation, as well as the Ford Foundation. And then those two foundations, first of all, those foundations would then receive their funding mainly from ExxonMobil, and then those foundations then donate their money to other right-wing foundations like the Bradley Foundation, the Olin Foundation, the Skate Foundation, and then those foundations then distribute money to think tanks and so on and so forth. So this is how the entire sort of right-wing network is created in the United States. So this is how the new conservatives basically managed to get this massive essentially grassroots movement, and it's evolved right up until the Tea Party. So this is the part I treat in my book, is how this has been created and how it's manipulated. And it's largely manipulated through conspiracy culture. One of the most important conduits for this kind of thinking is the John Birch Society. Right,
which is Rockefeller funded.
Yes. John Birch Society has ties with, like an interesting guy is Klingon Skeleton, and he wrote a very influential book called The Naked Communist. And he claimed to have been sort of, Hoover's right-hand man or something to that extent. And the guy had a pretty shady past. He lied about that. John Birch Society lied about his career credentials. And that's basically par for the course for the John Birch Society. They also have ties with what's called another group called Western Goals. And Western Goals basically, it's largely a CIA firm with all kinds of Iran-Contra connections and so on and so forth. But they are being basically sort of the most important voice for a lot of this conspiracy information, particularly in combinations against the Council on Foreign Relations, the Federal Reserve, and so on and so forth. And that's where we get the Patriot movement. So the Patriot movement is really very much the means to maintain this sense of a conspiracy, package it in patriotism, basically as a Trojan horse to carry neoliberal values. So to understand what neoliberalism is, so this is what I'm saying is that for the majority of conspiracy culture these days is still obsessed with this anachronism that the conspiracy is communistic, which is ridiculous. As I said, Communist Party of the United States is a fabrication. The reality is it's neoliberal. And neoliberalism starts with Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman from the Mount Pelerin Society, which was founded, I can't remember, in the 40s or 50s. So Mount Pelerin Society is a synarchist organization. This, again, is something we haven't talked about. Well, it's important for me to drop that out there for people to research into it. So basically, it's fascist economics. It's the idea that the way they packaged it is that they made comparisons to communist countries, and they said communist countries, the problem there is that everything is state control, so therefore, logically, they think any degree of state control is bad. So that's the basis of neoliberalism. And the reason that they've marketed that way is because these are the kinds of policies that are necessary for the advancement of the World Bank and the IMF, because their control of the world is carried out by imposing structural adjustments and austerity measures. And the only way to argue that privatization is the way for a country to resolve its economic ills is through privatization, is to basically argue against the values of any kind of public ownership or public input into the economy. And so the means of doing that is basically neoliberalism. So to get back to my point, what I was trying to say earlier, conservatism historically has never meant what it means today in the United States. Conservatism mainly has always meant it's been mainly reactionary. It's mainly whatever being against anything the left represents. Otherwise, it's largely never really meant much more than that, except for preserving the status quo. But what they've done, what the new conservatives have done, is that by aligning themselves with the Christian right, is they've been able to sneak through their neoliberal ideas, so that now American conservatism is basically one and the same as neoliberalism. So American conservative economic thinking is largely based on privatization, reduction of government, reducing taxes to the rich, of course.
Yeah.
Right? So this is what it is. So that's traditionally not conservatism. That is neoliberalism, a synarchist fascist ideology which begins with the Machiavellian society. And as I said, it's been carried through the Trojan horse of the Christian right and the Patriot movement and conspiracy culture in the United States.
Let me ask you this then. What do you think is the agenda behind Obamacare? Because they describe it as socialism, but here it is, it's run by the insurance companies. They're putting money into these big insurance company pockets. But it's the conservatives that are demonizing it as socialism when in fact it puts money in their pockets. What's the whole deal behind, what's going on?
Yeah. I can't explain that. I don't know how. I don't know why it gets revived every once in a while. Maybe it's because Clinton did the same thing. Right? I don't understand why the Democrats keep reviving this thing. That's the tragedy of the United States. People sort of contested with me on that point because they suggest that because it's a damn if you do, damn if you don't. Right? The reality is that charity is always the fundamental value of any successful civilization, or any civilization which hopes to be successful. Charity has always been the fundamental teaching of any major religion. Religion gets a really bad name these days, and it's associated with a whole lot of nonsense. People forget what it's really about. If you look at Jesus' message, it's basically charity, the concept of charity. It's essentially, frankly, a socialistic idea. That socialism somehow got associated with communism and atheism and so on and so forth. So the fact is, I think it's inevitable that and this is the wackiness of the whole libertarian movement, is to suggest that the problem with every society is the state itself. Right? It's not the state. You can't have a society without a state. The problem is not the state. The problem is the corruptors of the state.
Yeah.
The state is just it's an instrument. It's like a car. It's not a.
Yeah, the state as we have it right now is run by a bunch of crooks, man. That's the problem we got. We need to throw out the crooks, man.
The problem is, you look at the state of healthcare in the United States is deplorable.
Yeah.
So how do you solve it? Do you implement healthcare, which basically gives more control to the corruptors, or then you do what the libertarians and Tea Parties do and denounce it because it's a communist conspiracy, and then just make things worse, right? I mean, really, in the long run, what has to happen is that people have to realize what's really going on. I mean, it's not going to change as things are right now. It's not, one way or the other. It's not going to have any benefit as things stand right now.
Okay, well, let me ask you a question, because if they've got us running around in circles to such an elaborate depth as you describe, how can we ever get out from under this?
Research and honesty. That's what it is. I mean, one of my favorite lines at the end. The movie Devil's Advocate?
Sure.
So at the end of the movie, after the Keanu Reeves character sort of wakes up from this dream that he's had. So fortunately, it was just a dream where, he really came close. But then at the end, somehow the Al Pacino character flatters him. And then he turns to the camera and said, "Vanity, my favorite vice," right?
Right.
So that's the trick. The trick is truth and honesty. We're always going to have our weaker sides appealed to. So I think truth is not enough. Information is not enough. The key is struggling with your own tendency to glorify yourself.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. Vanity, essentially. Vanity and selfishness and
ego. Yeah.
Which basically comes back to the idea of rediscovering charity, because that's what forgiveness and charity. That's what it all comes down to. That's what the real truth is. Everything else is just information. That's the truth that people need to learn.
Yeah, that's very encouraging. Yeah.
This is what the Tea Party is doing the opposite of. They basically are teaching a Luciferian. They are opposing the state, opposing the Illuminati by proposing an alternative solution, which is actually based on the same Luciferian doctrine as the Illuminati is based on, which is a doctrine of selfishness.
See, but the thing is, though, I gotta forgive these people to a degree, because they have 24-hour right-wing radio with Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh just totally dumbing them down to a point beyond belief. You know, like how anybody can describe Obamacare as socialism or even being remotely akin to socialism. It's so bizarre.
Yeah. But this is what I find amazing. To what extent? Because if you look at the communist scare of the 50s, of the McCarthy era, it's amazing to what extent those kind of lingering sentiments are still serving their purpose these days. So
true, I even have people that I know, relatives of mine, stuff like that, are still calling things a communist plot. Russia's run by the mob these days. I don't know what's going on. But and Putin's like a multi-billionaire.
Absolutely. Who's going fishing with the bushes and Kennebunks and whatever. So.
Oh, really?
Well, that's what he was doing a couple of years ago when Bush was still in power.
Oh, I didn't see that one. Well, I think the Bushes are still in power. Yeah. Well, exactly. I don't think Obama has much power at all.
No, we have to agree on that one.
So listen, I'm going to take a quick little break and read some more commercials, but I was looking on your website and a couple of things, the Nation of Islam and Scientology.
Yeah.
Do you have some interesting things to share about that?
Plenty.
Oh, very good, very good. My audience loves that stuff. Okay, so let me read some commercials. You can get a drink of water and take a breath, and I'll start reading. Okay, now for a word from our sponsors. Let's see. First one is, okay, by the way, you can advertise here and promote your website or your business, or you have an event coming up or whatever it is, and just email me at oppermanreport@gmail.com, or you can even give me a call at 800-448-0772, and you have no idea the bargain you can get by advertising on this show. Right now, we're on 6 nights a week on like 10 different networks, and that's about to double. We can get on any network we want to, so you can lock in these low rates now. You would not believe how cheap it is. Now, one of my favorite sponsors is Amanda over at Pacific West Bamboo, and they're going to be at the Portland Bamboo Festival July 14th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. So stop by and say hi to Amanda, and God bless her, man, for all the help she does for us over here. And they're going to be at the Stevens Pavilion at Hoyt's Arboretum, okay, and they're featuring lectures, workshops, vendors, demonstrations, and they're also excited to announce that they'll be assisting the building of the stage and art pieces for Pickathon 2014 in Happy Valley, Oregon. Emailrevealer.com, the home of the online infidelity investigation. And guys, I invented this search. I invented the online infidelity investigation. No one else does this. I created this search about a good 8 years ago. I should be a billionaire by now, but who knows? Okay, now studies indicate up to 30% of the people using online dating services are already married and they're cheating on their partner. And so this search, the online infidelity investigation, is for people that have noticed signs of cheating and suspect their partner is cheating online with a secret social networking site like MySpace or Facebook, or with a secret personal ad on an internet dating site. So you provide us the email address of your husband or your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You give us their email address, and we trace it back to online dating websites, social network sites, all kinds of stuff, swinger sites, fetish sites, and you can even expand on it too. We can trace them back to porn sites. I can even trace them back to gambling sites. So check out the website, emailrevealer.com. There's a ton of services on there. And, we're here to help you. If you get in trouble, give us a call. My daughter, Victoria, she has a show tomorrow. It's her second show. It's called Teen Truth on cjmarsradio.com at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Check out infinityhomeplans.com. Infinity Home Plans and Design Services, your source for 3D, 2D architectural services. They offer a multitude of products, including stock home plans, 2D digital drawing sets, and 3D models and renderings, and more. InfinityHomeplans.com. That's Mike Gray. You might remember him. He was on the show last weekend. Okay, that's about it for all the sponsors. Now we're with our guy tonight, David Livingston. I'm Professor Livingston. I'm going to call him. I'm just giving this guy his own college course. Fascinating guy. His website is terrorism-illuminati.com. He's got a couple of books. You can Google him search for him on Amazon.com. He's got a bunch of books there. But two that I know about are Black Terror, White Soldiers, and Terrorism and the Illuminati, and they're both available on my blog, The Opperman Report. So, David, one of the things you have on here is the Nation of Islam and Scientology. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's a real can of worms.
Okay.
So it really, it opens up a lot of avenues for discussion. This actually brings us back, if you can believe it, to the creation of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay.
So, the Nation of Islam is not, I was in a debate with a guy from the Nation called Wesley Williams a few years ago, and he's actually a professor at Harvard, and he wanted to debate on the Bible. He wanted to debate, his point was that God is a man, and so I had to argue against him about that. But it's hard for me to argue with a Harvard scholar because I'm not a scholar of the Bible. But what was interesting to me was that I got to read his book, and I think it's called The Black God or something like that, because essentially the Nation of Islam believes that God is a man and God is black. God is a black man. So I read his book, and it turned out that it was a book of occult history, which, basically took every component from, any sort of mainstream occult version of history. Everybody was in there, from Count Saint Germain to Blavatsky, so on and so forth. Basically, an entire Luciferian doctrine. So what I found out is that the Nation of Islam is actually Prince Hall Freemasonry.
Really?
Prince Hall Freemasonry is basically sort of, the black man's Freemasonry in the United States. And so that's the lie. So, there's a whole undercurrent. This is why you look in the United States and there's so many black men who have these, Muslim names. A lot of them are from, people who legitimately converted to Islam, but there's also the significant undercurrent that I think is pretty much unrecognized by the rest of American culture, of this diffusion of these various, very wayward sort of pseudo-Islamic organizations. And most of them trace their descent to a guy named Noble True Ali, who founded the Moorish Science Temple. And I think that would have been back in the 40s or 50s. And that's where Elijah Muhammad got his start, as well as Wallace Fard. Wallace Fard is a very dubious character. It was a very long FBI file who basically claimed to be God and to rescue the lost tribe of Shabazz, as the story goes, by communicating the lost doctrine to Elijah Muhammad, who then founded the Nation of Islam. But when you look at the Moorish Science Temple, again, it has nothing to do with Islam. This is a thoroughly occult organization. There's lots of very curious stories about what was going on about, there's like human sacrifice and all kinds of, mind control and all kinds of weird stuff. I have all the information on my website if anybody's looking for it, because I can't, there's too much to go into. But basically, Noble Drew Ali's parents were initiated into Salafism. Now remember, Salafism, I told you, is the same reform movement that ISIS, the ISIS follows, as well as the Muslim Brotherhood, and most of the Saudi-funded terrorists or, fundamentalist Islamic organizations. They all follow this Salafi trend.
Okay.
So Noble Drew Ali, am I going too fast?
No, that's good to know. The Salafism thing, like you said, that's something to look for then.
This is the key, because the ISIS is basically advertising themselves as a Sunni, quote-unquote, Sunni organization, and really trying to attract the support of the rest of the Islamic world by pretending that they're a Sunni organization, but they're not. They're a Salafi organization, and that's huge difference. So Noble Drew Ali, as I said, his parents were initiated into Salafism by a man named Jamal Uddin al-Afghani. And this guy is absolutely fascinating. You know, when I first tried to understand how a person like Ayatollah Khomeini or how Bin Laden could be an agent, it really took me a long time to wrap my head around that, how it could be possible. But it's when you look at a guy like Afghani that it really starts to make sense. This guy, you know, I've heard it said before that the 20th century is the century of Aleister Crowley. Well, in reality, Aleister Crowley's primary influences really issued from Jamal Afghani. This is a guy who's almost entirely unknown in the West, but he is really the main source for much of the occult tradition that, you know, was filtered through Aleister Crowley and H.P. Blavatsky. So this guy, he's actually Iranian, but he's a double agent working for the British. Basically, he was Iranian, which means that he was a Shia, but he pretended to be Sunni in all these various places. And everywhere he went, he gets eventually kicked out. But he's also, when he's in Egypt, he's also the Grand Master of the Freemasons of Egypt. And he's pretty much kind of like the chief guru of any occult tradition in that part of the world. So, and which is all part of the basic mechanism that the British were using to undermine the Ottoman Empire in that part of the world. But also secretly, Jamal Afghani was part of this order called the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. And this is the order that influenced all the leading organizations of what's called the occult revival of the 19th century. So at the end of the 19th century, you had this sort of burgeoning of occult influences with all these various organizations that were, occult organizations that were founded. And lots of people flocked them. So you had things like the Theosophical Society, which was joined by Thomas Edison, no less.
Really?
Yes, yeah, the Golden Dawn. So I famously, Yates was part of the Golden Dawn and so on and so forth. So Blavatsky was the founder, and this is what I cover in my book. I mean, it's impossible to cover it all because it's a huge subject. And in fact, this brings us back to the issue of Afghanistan, because Blavatsky, there's so much to cover. So maybe I'll just draw some things and you can tell me if I'm going too far or too complicated. But basically, it all has to do with Rosicrucianism. So Afghani was the head of sort of this pseudo-Egyptian Rosicrucian tradition, which was supposed to be this long-standing occult tradition that had survived in Egypt. And that's where Blavatsky gets her start. Do you know what Blavatsky was?
No, I don't know.
So Eleanor Blavatsky. So as I said, there's this period called the occult revival. All these organizations, were being founded. And there's a lot of interest in the occult, particularly with channeling, spirit contact and things like that, the Ouija boards and magic and all these things, which basically laid the foundation. This was the foundation of the New Age movement. So Blavatsky, she was pretty much a leading figure in this movement, and she's considered essentially the godmother of the New Age movement. This is where I follow quite a bit. I follow quite a bit the evolution of the UFO phenomenon in the United States.
Right.
And that was all linked to Blavatsky. Most of the people who were associated with the first publicized contacts with so-called quote-unquote UFOs usually were people who belonged to Theosophical tradition, founded by Blavatsky and so on and so forth. So that's how important she is. To the extent where even her book, she created two huge, massive tomes of pseudo-history called ISIS Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine. And they have been referred to by Manly P. Hall as basically serving as kind of like the scriptures of Freemasonry. This is the extent of her influence in modern occult history is substantial. So, but her influence in turn was this guy Jamal Afghani, who initiated Noble Drew Ali, who initiated a Elijah Muhammad, who founded the Nation of Islam. So now we have the Nation of Islam teaming up with Scientology. So now this is the other trajectory, because L. Ron Hubbard was, you probably know the story. I think, doesn't McGowan cover this one, about the so-called Babylon working?
Oh, yeah, everyone knows that by now, yeah.
Okay, good. So L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons performed this satanic ritual to produce, what is it called, a moonchild? Like
Moonchild, yeah.
And Parsons was head of the OTO, Agape Lodge in California, and so basically a direct disciple of Aleister Crowley.
Yeah, and don't forget, too, Jack Parsons was, the NASA guy. JPL Laboratories was also known as Jack Parsons Lab. He was like the creator of modern-day rockets, yeah?
Exactly.
A big shot. Yeah.
A big shot. But that's the thing, is that science and the occult have always, sorcerers have always been scientists.
Right.
Scientists are not always sorcerers, but sorcerers are always scientists. That's why you look in Western history, and most of the celebrated scientists have been sorcerers. Like, even Isaac Newton, Da Vinci, and Francis Bacon, Roger Bacon, and so on and so forth. So,
we're talking about L. Ron Hubbard and Parsons and...
L. Ron Hubbard, right.
Yeah.
So they belong to the OTO, which was founded by Aleister Crowley. So Aleister Crowley, basically, he founded the OTO, but he got his start with the Golden Dawn, which basically was a sort of a regurgitation of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, of which Jamal Afghani was a leader. You see what I'm saying? So from Jamal Afghani, you have two trajectories of his influence. And one of them was the occult tradition, like Blavatsky, most importantly Aleister Crowley and his OTO. And then simultaneously, Jamal Afghani is also the founder of the Salafi reform movement of Islam, of which the Muslim Brotherhood comes out of, and then as well of the Nation of Islam in the United States. So for L. Ron Hubbard, or Scientology, and the Nation of Islam to be combining forces is really just a continuation of their shared tradition, leading all the way back to Jamal Afghani, who was essentially the source influence for both traditions.
But do they have any open connections in modern day times? Or do they have any open associations that we can see?
You mean Scientology and Nation of Islam?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's completely open.
Okay, I'm not aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah, just Google it. I was shocked. I didn't realize it until recently. But yeah, I thought it was a major discovery. But no, it's been well advertised for a while. Like it's an open thing that Farrakhan acknowledges his association with Scientology.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, because Farrakhan has this whole thing about the big mothership and the UFO and stuff like that, and he's into all that numerology. I mean, I listened to one of his speeches once. He was just going on and on and on about numerology.
And that's the thing. See, the Nation of Islam is a UFO religion.
Right, and so is Scientology.
Exactly.
Xenu.
They're all, and this is the basis of my book. Blavatsky, fascism, and UFOs, pretty much. And it's an evolution. That's a string. That's like one comes after the other.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. So then, what do you think about all these people right now, all these proponents? Hey, another interesting thing too. You see it constantly about the ancient astronauts on the History Channel, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Rupert Murdoch, if he's pumping out some information 24 hours a day, it's not in our best interest, okay? No. That's one thing for sure. So what's your take on all of that, then?
It's Freemasonry.
Oh, really?
There's a fascinating thread that I follow in the book, and there's two components to MK Ultra. And one part was drug use, or
right.
What they call entheogens now, right? And then the other part was their remote viewing experiments, but they were one and the same. Most of the stuff took place at Stanford Research Institute, SRI, which is simultaneously the birth of the New Age movement, particularly with Willis Harman, and the IONS, which is the Institute for Noetic Science.
Yeah, I think even Leary came out of Stanford, no?
But maybe not the Stanford Research Institute.
Okay.
So that's part of it. So this is the institute that had all kinds of quacko contracts with the government, and one of them was to carry out their remote viewing experiments. And what's interesting is that most of the guys who were in charge of leading most of the experiments were Scientology.
I was going to say that myself, yeah.
Bingo Swan and, all these guys. So what happens is that way back in the 50s, this starts with a guy named Andrei Puharich, and he makes contact with the Nine. And these are a group of entities, channeled entities, who claim to be the ancient gods of Egypt. So this is where you get this whole idea all wrapped up with Edgar Cayce's prophecies about a hall of records or something like that. This idea that the gods of ancient times, who were actually extraterrestrials, buried their records below, somewhere beneath the pyramids or beneath the Sphinx.
Right.
So they were using all these remote viewers to try to find these bloody things. And then they started conducting all these various, excavations and projects in Egypt.
I think they still are till today.
Pretty much. And
Yeah.
This is why it's all connected to, one of the guys, Dawi Hawass, who was the head of the Antiquities Ministry in Egypt.
Right.
He's connected to the whole thing. He's also connected to AMARC, which is the American Rosicrucian Organization. This is all Rosicrucian stuff. And this is where you get all these guys like Graham Hancock and Robert Boldall, the Sirius Mystery and all this stuff. It's all just Freemasonry. Because this is interesting, is that Robert Anton Wilson, who's very much a key character in all this stuff, he said that he was told that the secret of Freemasonry is that the Freemasons are in contact with beings from Sirius. I'm serious. So that's what's going on.
Seriously?
This is it. So this is why you have Boval writing this, the mystery of the Dogon and what's his other books? They're trying to prove that shafts inside the pyramids are pointing to, Orion constellation and all this, basically rubbish. But it's all because it's all basically Freemasonry, and most importantly, it's all based on the theosophy of H.P. Blavatsky. Like you look at all these guys were followers of Blavatsky, starting with Puharich, especially a guy like Graham Hancock. He won't acknowledge his debt to Blavatsky, but his books is Blavatsky.
Really?
And this, this brings us right back to the beginning of what I talked about in the first place, is that what piqued my interest in the beginning, back when I was in college, was this mysterious reference to the Aryan race. It was called in the textbook, they were called Indo-Europeans, but in reality it's the Aryan race. And this is very much the basic legend of the occult. And that is that on Atlantis, which in the Bible is the time before the flood, the Bible says that the sons of God came down to earth and basically married or bred with the daughters of Cain. And the Bible it's translated as sons of God, but I think in Hebrew it's Bani Elohim or something like that.
Right.
But basically this is known in the occult as referring to Lucifer and the fallen angels. So they believe that Lucifer, the fallen angels, descended to earth, interbred with human beings, and created that Lucifer and the fallen angels, actually they believe that they were gods, the true gods, not the imposter creator God. This is how they interpret it. And that they created a hybrid half-divine race, who are the Aryan race. So then you have the flood. They escape the flood, they escape Atlantis, and they land in the mountains of Asia. They spread out from there. They spread into Persia. They spread into Europe, and that's how you have the beginnings of the Aryan race, who throughout history have been a semi-divine people who have carried forward and maintained the occult tradition. So when they talk about ancient aliens, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about the sons of God of the Bible. They're talking about Lucifer and the fallen angels. Because what they believe is that it was Lucifer and the fallen angels. This is what they mean when they say that the ancient aliens taught these various civilizations in ancient times. They taught them how to, the arts of civilization, how to build pyramids and, forge iron or whatever it was that the technologies that they had. The myth is that the Lucifer and the fallen angels taught them that. So this is pretty much what they're trying to repackage these days, and they think that they can, demonstrate it with their sewer history. And that's what the Ancient Aliens series is all about. Because when you look at the Ancient Aliens series, it's the main host is that guy, a terrorist person named Chukalos, and who basically is his partner is Eric von Daniken.
Right.
And Eric von Daniken is really the guy who kind of blew open this whole, I'm sorry to say, ridiculous mythos with his publishing of the Chariots of the Gods. And that's what it's all about. And the way it connects back to MK Ultra is because what they believe is that throughout history, the ancient mysteries used to use drugs to contact spirits, discarded entities. So how it's sort of come back together in our time is that this is where MK Ultra and mind control, LSD use, hallucinogens, and so on and so forth is connected to the UFO culture, because ultimately it means a recreation of the ancient occult practices, which was to make contact, to use drugs to make contact with aliens. That's essentially the story.
Hey, real quick, are you familiar with Peter Levenda's work where he talks about that group that were doing seances and stuff?
Which one? I know his work, but I'm not sure which one.
Yeah, it's not fresh in my mind. I'm sorry, but it seems to jive in with a lot of what you're talking about here. Yeah, sorry. Well, listen,
Peter Levenda lets on more than he knows.
One more time?
So Peter Levenda, he reveals more than he knows.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah.
Or he knows more than he reveals?
Yeah, he's an insider.
Yeah, right, okay. Hey, so listen, we only got a couple of minutes left. What do you want to leave us with? Tell everybody how to get your book and how to find your website and anything you want to talk about.
Thanks. Yes, my website is, as you mentioned, terrorism-illuminati.com. I maintain a blog there. I post regular articles that sort of give snippets about what I talk about in my book. There's also links to my various books. I've got a video library. I've got lists of essential reading, all kinds of stuff, which I hope is useful for researchers out there. And what else? That's pretty much it.
Hey, what about speaking engagements? Do you ever do like lectures and seminars and stuff? No, I haven't done one in years. With the age of the internet, everything I've done is over the internet or the phone. Okay, yeah, because it seems like it would be something right up your alley. There's a wealth of information, man. I can't thank you enough, and I thank you too for taking it easy on me. Like I said, I asked you before you came on, because I'm not up to speed. I went to a community college, so we didn't learn a lot of the classics and stuff, No
problem. Well, all I try to do is synthesize what I've learned to make it easier for others, to save them the trouble I went through. Yeah, right. Okay, well, we've got a few minutes left. Next week. No, we don't have a few minutes left. Well, anyway, thank you very much, David Livingston. God bless you, man. Thanks for coming on. And like I said again, thanks for taking it easy on me. Next week, we got Adam Gorightly. All kinds of books about the Process Church, all kinds of Charlie Manson. We'll be getting into all kinds of great stuff. Don't forget to, check out my GoFundMe to save my family, on Facebook. Please go there and help us out. And the Opera Report's YouTube channel,